Welcome to Stereo 3D Productions, folks. It's time to do a kind of video that I have not done on this channel for a pretty long time. It's time to do a first impressions of a racetrack in iRacing using virtual reality. Now today I'll be using the Oculus Rift CV1, but I have a sort of underlying reason for this video in the first place. For about 2 months now, I've been using new equipment for all driving simulations, that being a Logitech G29 and a Thrustmaster TH8A shifter. And I've been meaning to give my summary on this hardware. As I said, I've had this for about 2 months, so I think it's about time that I show you what I think about this equipment. And two birds, one stone, I'm going to do a first impressions of Road America using the amazing Lotus 79 in iRacing, which happens to be one of the few open wheel cars old enough to have a foot clutch and an H pattern shifter, a traditional shifter. So I think that's pretty appropriate of a car to use to review the entire hardware configuration that I have. So a little backstory on the shifter before I actually put on the headset and get started and drive here. Originally, I went for the Logitech add-on shifter, which is about $80 Canadian. I figured it would be a simple solution because it plugs right into the wheel, works with it as one controller, except after 2 days of testing, I unfortunately had to return the thing. There's two main problems with it. First off, unlike the steering wheel, which has some pretty good clamps to it, I never had problems with this table and most simulator hardware. The shifter's clamps were weak, incredibly weak. At some point I had to add adhesive to hold it in place because it simply could not do it on its own. That was highly frustrating, and it took a while for me to figure out how to get it to stay there. The second problem, and this is the main reason why I actually ended up returning it, is it uses an internal physical button mechanism with the shifter lever in order to register shifts. And that would obviously cause it to miss shifts a lot more often than I pleased. After 2 days of trying it, I realized there's nothing I could do. It's a pretty bad product, and I went ahead and returned it. However, I still wanted me a shifter. So I did a bit of research and found out about the TH8A. It's about twice the price of the Logitech add-on shifter. It's a bit a larger hit on your wallet. However, it seems to have the characteristics to come with it. It's mostly built of metal. It appears incredibly sturdy. It's got a really nice H pattern on it, and you can actually replace the plates. And a cool feature of the shifter is that the knob is one of these standard car shifter knobs. So you can actually go to a shop and get this changed for something you prefer. It does come with its own knob, of course. But I thought these were all very cool elements, and on top of that, what was really appealing to me is that it uses what I think are Hall effect switches, magnetic switches, to register the shifts. And after only a day of testing, I had yet to see the thing actually miss a shift on me. So I was very, very satisfied. Another big upside to this shifter is it does not depend on you using a Thrustmaster wheel. It can actually be connected independently via its own USB port. Now I want to give a warning on that setup. For those of you who are interested in doing this, this will not work with everything, mostly because some simulators expect your wheel and shifter to be one controller. I found the problem to exist in Project Cars and in Dirt Rally so far. I've not yet tried Assetto Corsa, but this setup does work very well in iRacing. You basically map each gear as a button, and then you're good to go permanently. So I'm going to go ahead and put on the Oculus Rift because the main feature here is not all this wonderful hardware, which I will continue talking about throughout this video. It is the racetrack and a bit the race car. I have very little experience with the Lotus 79. I do have sufficient experience to not drive it like a Muppet, but I'm still relatively new to this car if you compare it to my experience with the IndyCar Dallara DW12. So, this is obviously a shifter car, so I'll have to use the clutch Every time I shift, it's going to be as realistic as possible. In fact, one of the big changes for me with the Logitech wheel, the G29, is the presence of a clutch. There's also something else that's really nice. I have these huge aluminum paddles here. I am arriving from a Logitech GT driving force, which was the sort of mid-end wheel that Logitech were making with force feedback, except it didn't have these wonderful aluminum paddles for sequential shifting. It instead had little plastic buttons on the back of the wheel. Alright, on to Road America. Now I will be careful rolling out the car and doing my first few laps because I've actually never driven on this racetrack before. I have watched races on TV here. I've never been here in person. I do have a few clues as to how the track is. In fact, I think it's the kind of track I'm going to fall in love with. But I do not have enough information to know all the driving by heart at all. So it's going to be a very interesting experiment combined with my summary on all this hardware. As far as the track goes, it's totally first impressions, but I have had the hardware for about 2 months now, like I said, so this is more of a summary on the hardware end. But let's get rolling. Now, first things first, as I'm about to roll out the car, put it in first gear and use the clutch to get it moving, I do have to say, and part of this goes on iRacing and part of this goes on the hardware, I do not find that getting a car rolling in first gear with a clutch is realistic in iRacing at all. In fact, it's way too forgiving. Now, maybe this is a good thing for the context of an online competition, but I have some friends who could actually use a lesson in getting a car rolling in first gear with a clutch. And I've thought of using the simulator to introduce them to it before doing it with a real car, and it turns out that I just can't do that because it's not realistic enough. In fact, it would actually teach the driver bad habits more than anything else to practice it in the simulator. I'll give you an example. I'm going to get the car rolling here in first gear, and this is a car that would be incredibly tough to start with a clutch. I'm just going to lift the clutch to a crazy level and start giving gas in an incorrect fashion, and look at the car just gently start going. Forgives my terrible unclutching. So on the rolling front, on getting rolling in first gear, it is not realistic, but here's where things get interesting. The shifting is legit. Once you got the car rolling and you start doing your shifting, that part is incredibly realistic. So it's kind of somewhere in the middle there, but I was disappointed to see that there isn't even an option to get a realistic first gear rolling start. So I will be cautious. This is my very first lap at Road America. I'm using a car that is kind of tricky to drive. And I'm also using a foot clutch and a shifter. Problems of a new racetrack. So far, this seems to be kind of racetrack with a lot of high-speed sections. Might be the kind of track I'm gonna like. This is one of the advantages of virtual reality, is doing what you'd normally do in a real car, and is look far and look to the sides a lot. Ooh, uphill. It's hard when you don't know the track and got an uphill. Okay, that should have been in second gear. A little downshift because I don't know what's coming. Oh, is that the front straight already? Okay, it's not gonna take too long to learn. So as you may notice, I'm actually doing heel and toes on this system. And I found that to be incredibly easy to work with. It can actually be unforgiving sometimes. In contrast with rolling in first gear, getting the car rolling. Like I said, the shifting is pretty legit, all the way down to the heel and toes. Could have stayed in fourth, alright. You know when I said I should have been in second gear in that corner and I try in fourth? So, one thing that I found iRacing handles really well is the throttle blip. If you get your throttle blip wrong, it's gonna let you know by fucking up the car, which I found actually really impressive. I've driven, back in the old day, arcade machines that had a clutch and a shifter. And it was a lot more forgiving than this. We've gone a long way when it comes to using a shifter and a clutch in a simulator, I find. What really shocks me is that this is a retail simulation that you can buy and use at home with your own hardware. And it's really decently realistic in terms of shifting. So, kudos to that. I'm really impressed by that. Now, I want to talk about the force feedback on this new wheel of mine, because I've found it to be quite satisfying. It's an upgrade that I didn't expect. I thought the force feedback would be a lot like my Logitech GT driving force, but it turns out that I think the driving force only had one force feedback motor, while this one actually has two of them. And it makes a pretty big difference. Either that, or both of them had two, and this one just has stronger motors, because I can feel a lot more kick in this wheel, a lot more fight. And here's the thing, no amount of electric motors can simulate to you the real force that you get in one of these race cars. The stress that your arms would get on the steering wheel can only be actually produced by the race car itself. So, in my opinion, the more the merrier. Some people would say it's a bad thing to have too much force feedback. I disagree. I say that the more the merrier, because it can't get realistic enough. Now on top of that, with this car, what's exciting is I've added this shifter in the mix, so I have to let go of the wheel with one hand in order to do my shifting. And that's actually added a lot of challenge. I think that is actually awesome. I can really feel like I'm driving the car. A track like this is a great litmus test for a setup like this, because it's a bumpy track, but it's incredibly fast and satisfying. From what I see so far, I'm liking this track. I'm already sort of getting the hang of it, at least forming a memory of all the corners. But as far as the kind of track this is going to land somewhere probably in my top 3. Woo! As I said, I was starting to get memory. I might have just gotten cocky there. Never mind memory. Let's get the car back on the track. Hopefully I don't have damage. I should be good. The struggles of learning a new track, people. The struggles of learning a new track. It's a lot harder with a shifter to correct a last second mistake where you realize you're in the wrong gear. You don't really have much time to go do all them heel and toes to end up in the proper gear at the last second, right? You can't do a save like you would with a sequential shift. So that is quite challenging. The feel of the shifter is not like those $1,000 shifters you would buy from Fanatec, but it is still quite incredible. For something that only costs $200 in comparison to the Fanatec shifters, is really one hell of a good shifter. The other upside is, when I bought this one, I actually ran it through the same kind of tests I did with the Logitech shifter, and go figure, I never saw this miss a shift other than by my own mistake. If I screw up my clutch timing, iRacing will decide that I've missed the shift, which is fair enough, but the shifter itself always registers the action, which is kind of important. What I found stupid with the Logitech G29 shifter is, I mean, this thing literally defies the purpose of being a shifter by missing shifts. I found that to be incredibly disappointing. I know it's only $80, but it's a completely wasted $80 because it doesn't do its primary function. Whereas this one does. Gotta say, I'm starting to like this racetrack more and more as I learn it. It's a legend, and rightfully so. Quite an incredible racetrack. I love the corner it just went through. I don't know what it's called, but I fucking love it. Oh, a little early there on the downshift, but... Or not. Or not. So, yeah, this shifter, although it doesn't work with everything you'll use it with, I really, really like it a lot. It's doing the job incredibly well when it does work. It's fun that my initial few laps, the only memory I had of this racetrack was from stuff I saw on TV. And this is where a laser scan really pays off. iRacing's tracks are all laser scans. I recognize the landmarks. Ooh, that was late. Woo! I recognize the landmarks, and thus I sort of had an idea of what was coming even at the first lap. It's really impressive when you can actually recognize a physical location in a piece of software. I find that incredibly cool. iRacing have done it many times with me. One of the ones I found most impressive, because I'd actually been there in person before, was Watkins Glen. The first time I tried Watkins Glen about 4 years ago, when I first started using iRacing, I was sold on iRacing and Watkins Glen as a track, because I never drove it, right? I had only seen races in person there. And I was so happy to get on the track and recognize things. It was quite impressive. And it's the same thing here. You know, I've heard complaints about how the trees look in iRacing. Personally, I won't attribute too much importance to graphical fidelity in a simulation software. What counts to me is the driving being realistic. But what's so wrong with the trees? I know there are billboards and cards, but for the most part, as I'm driving, what I see out of the corner of my eye looks real. Everything looks real. So, I don't see what the problem is with the graphical fidelity of iRacing. Maybe it's because I use VR, and VR cheats your brain into believing you're there a lot more with the stereoscopic 3D, which also helps with the driving. Having depth perception is pretty important in a car, and you can't do that with screens. That's why if anyone asks me, I would not waste my money ever on buying 3 monitors. I think it's silly, because there's no benefit in it. At least, not compared, woohoo! Again, not compared to what VR can bring you. VR will win over a triple monitor setup anytime. Because with VR, first off, you can look wherever you want, and you have depth perception. That's the most important part. The depth perception is what, first off, multiplies the degree of realism, but also makes the driving itself super intuitive. You're no longer in a piece of software, you're actually driving the car. Now I know that software can have bugs in it and everything, and sometimes that'll break your immersion, but for the most part, you're in the car. Racing in iRacing, haha, racing in iRacing, is incredible. You feel like you are with the people on the track. You get the same kind of anger as if you're driving a real car when shit goes down. It is for real. It is one of the things I've done most in virtual reality to date. I think the other thing I've done a lot of is development, and then gameplay would be third, and I've done shit tons of gameplay too, so get an idea. I do a lot of VR, but driving sims are probably, in terms of hours of use, the primary thing I've done with VR, just because it is so realistic. I don't have enough money to buy myself an old race car and go roll it at the racetrack myself or maintain it, yet I have this library of amazing vehicles I can try now, and it really does feel like I have all these racetracks in my home to a good degree. This makes me think of a larger version of Barber Motorsports Park, oddly enough. There's no chicane, but aside from that, it's got some similarities. Also, there's none of that miniature corkscrew as well that Barber has, but it's got its own feel at the same time, and a little bit of similarity to Barber Motorsports Park. Watkins Glen as well. It's got some Watkins Glenness to it. Now, Watkins Glen is obviously a huge legend racetrack, kind of like this one. So far, this is really proving to be my kind of track. I could probably start getting competitive on this thing quite rapidly. In fact, now I'd actually feel comfortable to start taking all my other cars, trying them out here, and getting into a competition online. I mean, it's the next step. Once you've figured out the track, you can lap it as much as you want. You want to get to some racing. my best right there. See if we can't top it one more time. I'm gonna get to my conclusions after. Topped it. I'm down to the tenths of a second now. Still just above 2 minutes per lap in a Lotus 79. I don't know what the records are or anything. I don't think I'm doing anything competitive yet, but I will get there soon enough. But I do think that for the context of this video, I am beyond the first impressions of this track now and sort of getting acquainted with it in terms of a competitive drive. So I'm going to go ahead and give my summary on this. Would this be my favorite racetrack? No. I'm still going to put Watkins Glen up there. Why? It's hard to tell you. It's actually really hard to tell you why I find Glen more compelling. This is a very fast racetrack. This is probably going to be, whoops, somewhere in my top 5, actually. It's not the single best high-speed track. In fact, right now I would even put Barber Motorsports Park above it. This is entirely personal, of course. Not everyone would do that. But just in terms of fun factor, it lacks... I mean, it's full of corners in which you can kill yourself. Granted, if I was in a real car right now, my opinion would likely be a lot more positive. Because it looks like a scary track to drive on in real life. Like this corner here where you're like, oh, I'm going at, oh my god, I'm gonna die, and my head will come off kilometers an hour. That, honestly, is cool in a car. In the sim, it may not be compelling enough to comprise the entire fun factor. You need something else. And I think this thing is missing a couple of slower turns, such as a chicane or something. And I'm not talking Herman Tilke design tier shit. No. Okay? I hate Herman Tilke designs. Let's just... or Tilke, whatever his fucking name is that guy is ruining Formula 1 by designing terrible racetracks. I mean, he should learn a thing or two from a track like this, if you ask me. But at the same time, it's missing one chicane, one painful turn in which you curse every time you go through. Maybe a kind of corkscrew like they have at Barber Motorsports Park or at Laguna Seca. But for the most part, this is a fun racetrack. I won't deny it, and it would be in my top 5 go-to tracks, definitely. The fun factor is definitely high. And one good thing about it that I can't evaluate right now is it appears to be racing heaven. In terms of managing traffic here, it must not be too difficult. There's plenty of room to pass. A lot of high-speed sections where you're going to be next to your opponent, looking at the bumper of their car as you try to plan your next move. The carousel here must be a wonderful place to have a duel. I mean, this whole racetrack, maybe in the context of a race, will be a lot more fun than the other tracks I've mentioned, just because of that. But in terms of lapping, in terms of just experiencing the racetrack itself, I still much prefer Watkins Glen. And I would say that Barber Motorsports Park is a close competitor, and it sort of wins over by a little bit. The problem with Motorsports Park, Barber Motorsports Park, is it's short. It's incredibly short compared to this one. But that's it. I really like the track, and as far as iRacing's rendition goes, this is really impressive. I feel like I'm here. It looks exactly like what I see on TV. Whoa, there I go, fucking up a shift right there. So I spoke about bad shifting and the simulator registering it. I actually almost unclutched the car from 5th to 2nd. I didn't let go of the clutch because that would have made the engine wail and hit the limiter. But you can do mistakes with the shifter and the simulator will register them. If I try to shift without clutch, it's not going to register it. So on the shifting front, on having a shifter, can I do it? Damn it. On the shifter front, this little thing is amazing, for one, and for two, I think iRacing handles it incredibly well, or at least it just handles general shifting incredibly well. I like that if you miss your blip on the gas when you're doing heel and toes, and you let go of the clutch, your wheels will spin or lock up. You will actually go off the track because you blipped wrong. At least you have to be quick to release the clutch in your heel and toes. Otherwise, if you wait too long, after doing your blip, if you wait too long and then release the clutch, your wheels will either spin or lock up. Which I think is incredible, because that's what a car would do in real life if you did that. So, just unforgiving enough. It is forgiving. There are things I did during this video with the clutch and the shifter that would not be tolerated by a real car, not even a road car. But still, it's not so forgiving that it's kind of like a joke, you know? Kind of like starting in first gear, I find is a joke right now. In terms of realism, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I think it's necessary for the simulation software to work in the context of an online competition, where you don't want guys stalling all over the place, right? Woohoo! That was cool. That goes to the Lotus 79, by the way. Old-fashioned cars could be tossed around the racetrack like that without completely going off. I really like the 79, and if you want to learn a track, it's a good car to do it. It'll teach you your shift timings, even though other cars will be different or have more gears or less gears. It'll teach you your shifting timings. It will, I don't know, I find it keeps you on your guard, the fact that you have to clutch and shift all the time, and it makes you work at a new track a lot quicker, in my opinion. So as I prepare to wrap up this video, I do want to give my conclusions on pretty much everything. I've done the racetrack, I've spoken to that, but now I want to talk about the steering wheel and the shifter. I'm incredibly happy with both purchases. As far as the steering wheel goes, it is definitely an upgrade from the Logitech GT driving force. I would recommend it to anyone who has an Oculus Rift or an HTC Vive and are looking to do some racing. Now, on top of that, if you're an iRacing driver, what you want to do is get one of these shifters. Do not get the Logitech attachment shifter. It's a piece of garbage, basically, a waste of plastic, and a waste of $80 Canadian worth of your money. It really is something that is disposable, and I think they should discontinue it, honestly, because something that misses shifts is simply unacceptable. A shifter that misses shifts. How? What? No. So, advise against that shifter, but this TH8A shifter is actually a delight for the price it costs. I mean, I know the Fanatec shifters are like orgasmic degrees of realism, but we don't all have $1,000 to spend on a shifter. And this will do the job nicely if you also don't have $1,000 to spend on a shifter. I'm really, really impressed. The feel is not tight like a real shifter, obviously, because it's not connected to a fucking transmission, but it's still got a gritty feel to it that I really like with that metal plate, and it feels sturdy as hell. Feels like I could throw this down a 10-story building and still see it in one piece at the bottom. So I'm really, really impressed, and I'm happy that I actually found an alternative, because I was worried with the Logitech shifter. The thing that I got as a taste from the Logitech shifter is trying out a shifter in a simulator. For the time where it would decide to work for a sustained 10 minutes, it was really enjoyable, and I was torn on having to refund it, but I did. And then I found this guy, and now it's smooth sailing ahead. I'm really, really happy with this hardware overall. The clutch, magnificent. The fact that I could adjust the G29 pedals for my tiny feet, absolutely delightful. You might notice that I've taken a liking into it enough to go and bother putting a foot cam for my videos to show you what's going on down there while I'm driving. So, the last point, which is the main feature of this video, Road America. If you have iRacing and a virtual reality headset, I recommend this track. I highly recommend this track. In fact, I'd recommend the combination that I'm using now. The Lotus 79 on this track. I'm having a lot of fun right now. It is quite a good track. Something to put in your collection, similar to Watkins Glen, Barber, but in its own way very unique, a little more simplistic, and a little more focused, believe it or not, actually a little more focused on top speed than Watkins Glen, which is a track that is focused on top speed. Alright folks, as I'm about to cross the finish line one more time, I thank you for watching this video on Stereo 3D Productions. This has been iRacing, Road America, using the beautiful, legendary Lotus 79. Giving you a summary on my hardware, the Logitech G29 and the Thrustmaster TH8A working in tandem. Absolutely beautiful configuration. And folks, I shall see you next time.